In the early 1990s, Japan was achieving something no other country had managed. Engineers at Mazda, Toyota, and Nissan were creating turbocharged engines with virtually no lag, not just reduced lag, almost none at all. And they accomplished this without redesigning the turbocharger itself. Instead, they completely rethought how the entire turbo system operates. This innovation became known as sequential twin turbocharging. It powered some of the most iconic engines ever installed in production cars. The two JZ GTE in the Supra and the 13 BREW in the RX-7. Today, these cars command six-figure prices at auctions. Collectors compete to own them, yet few people discuss the engineering that made them exceptional or why this particular turbocharging method was eventually phased out. This is that story, and it begins not with a car, but with a nation overflowing with wealth. To understand why Japan's automotive industry surged with innovation in the early 1990s, you have to look at the decade before it. Between 1985 and 1991, Japan experienced what economists now call the asset price bubble. A period of extraordinary and almost irrational economic expansion. Real estate and stock values skyrocketed so rapidly and to such extremes that they became detached from reality. The Nikkei stock index reached 38,915 yen at the end of 1989. Property prices in Tokyo increased by more than 300% in just 6 years. Japanese companies were flush with cash. Banks issued loans with minimal oversight, and the nation as a whole felt unstoppable. By any standard, it was one of the most remarkable economic booms ever seen in a developed country. For automakers, this translated into unprecedented engineering freedom. Research and development budgets expanded to levels unmatched anywhere else in the world at the time. Executives at Toyota, Nissan, Honda, and Mazda weren't focused on building inexpensive cars. They wanted to create vehicles superior to anything produced in Europe or America. Most importantly, their engineers had the financial backing to experiment without limits. Honda introduced an all-aluminum Formula One-inspired mid-engine supercar, the NSX, developed with input from Senna on handling. Nissan equipped the R32 Skyline GTR with four-wheel steering alongside its AISA ETS all-wheel drive system. Mitsubishi incorporated active aerodynamics and four-wheel steering into the 3000 GT VR4. Even economy cars received advanced engineering. Toyota fitted a Corolla variant with 5 valves per cylinder and individual throttle bodies, allowing it to rev beyond 9,000 revolutions per minute, technology Ferrari wouldn't adopt until years later. However, the most intriguing and impactful engineering challenge these companies tackled was turbocharging. By the late 1980s, turbochargers had become the preferred method for extracting power from small displacement engines, but they came with a significant drawback, and Japan's engineers were determined to solve it. Before exploring the solution, it's important to understand the problem. A turbocharger uses exhaust gases to spin a turbine, which drives a compressor that forces additional air into the engine. More air means more fuel, and more fuel means more power. In theory, it's an efficient system, recovering energy from exhaust that would otherwise be wasted. The downside is responsiveness. The turbine requires exhaust pressure to spin, and that pressure builds with engine speed. At low RPM, there isn't enough exhaust flow to quickly spool the turbo. Press the throttle at low speeds and there's little immediate response. Then suddenly, as the engine revs climb, boost arrives aggressively. This delay is known as turbo lag. In a performance car, it creates unpredictable power delivery at moments when precision matters most. Exiting corners, overtaking on highways, or driving through winding mountain roads. So, the common engineering solution back then was to use a smaller turbocharger. Smaller turbos, spool up faster because their turbine wheels have less mass to get moving. That means you get quicker response and, reduced lag. But there's a catch. Small turbos struggle at high RPM. They just can't move enough air to keep up when the engine is really demanding maximum airflow. The result? A pretty narrow power band. You're either getting quick response with, honestly, pretty weak top-end performance, or you get strong high-end power but with sluggish response down low. It's a compromise. You have to pick one or the other. Japanese engineers in the late 1980s, though, they completely rejected that compromise. They wanted both, instant response and strong top-end power. Their answer was sequential twin turbocharging, using two turbochargers of different sizes working in sequence, each one tuned for a specific part of the rev range. So, a small turbo would handle low RPM response, while a larger turbo would take over at higher RPM. The real trick, though, was making the transition between the two feel totally seamless. And wow, that turned out to be extremely complex. The first mass-produced Japanese car to use sequential twin turbocharging actually came from Mazda, in a car that, honestly, exceeded just about everyone's expectations. The FD-RX-7, which launched in 1991, was built around Mazda's rotary engine, the 13 BREW. Now, this was a 1.3-liter twin-rotor Wankel engine, a size that sounds almost absurdly small for a performance car, right? Rotary engines, though, have their own unique quirks. The big thing is, they make power at really high RPM. They absolutely thrive on revs. If you pair them with a large, slow-spooling turbo, it's a pretty poor match. The engine just sits stuck at the low end of its power band, waiting for boost. And when the turbo finally wakes up, the surge of power can be, well, abrupt and honestly kind of tough to control. Mazda engineers had actually been working on sequential turbo systems since the mid-1980s, first putting them into the luxury Unos Cosmo in 1990, before really refining the idea for the RX-7. The 13 BREW used two similarly sized turbos arranged to work sequentially. At low RPM, all the exhaust gases would go straight to the primary turbo. This focused flow let the smaller turbo spool up quickly, producing boosts somewhere between about 1,800 and 2,500 revolutions per minute, way earlier than a conventional single turbo. Then, as engine speed climbed toward 4,500 RPM, a valve would gradually start redirecting exhaust flow to the secondary turbo, bringing it up to speed in the background. Once the transition was complete, both turbos would operate together, pulling the engine smoothly all the way to its 8,000 RPM redline. The result was, honestly, pretty remarkable. This engine made 255 horsepower from just 1.3 liters, with a power delivery that felt almost like a naturally aspirated engine, smooth, linear, and responsive, no matter how much you press the throttle. The RX-7 could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 5 seconds, which put it right up there with cars that had way bigger engines. But more importantly, the way it delivered power made it super controllable in corners and during demanding driving, giving you immediate response instead of that frustrating delayed acceleration. Now, achieving this level of performance came at a price: immense complexity. The vacuum system that managed the transition between the two turbos used 67 individual hoses. It was such a dense, intricate network that Mazda technicians actually nicknamed it the rat's nest. Every single hose had to work perfectly. If even one failed, because of heat or just regular wear, the whole system could go haywire. The secondary turbo might not engage right, transitions could get jerky, or boost control could fail altogether.